I would like to introduce our next group of people, Deborah Dickey and Casey Wooster from St. Augustine and environs. I would like, Deborah Dickey currently serves as a trustee for the Rawlings Society and has served as the board member of St. Augustine's Classic Theater. A theater director and playwright, her original works include Threads of Silver and Gold, Women of the Panama Canal, Sweet Emmeline, The Musical Journey of Debbie McCade, and Crossroads, Marjorie Canaan Rawlings and Norton Baskin in Unguarded Moments. Some of you remember that wonderful play. Deborah received her MFA in acting and directing from the University of Florida. Go Gators! And was a member of the University of Arizona's Theater Studies and Directing faculty. She still has her email in the University of Arizona.
That's what you get when you retire, that's it.
You get an email that you can keep in perpetuity. She has directed in professional and educational theater for over 40 years, and her production of Color Struck at the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center in St. Augustine marked the Florida premiere of Zora Neale Hurston's award-winning play. So in keeping to our homage to Zora, Casey is currently a trustee also for the Rawlings Society and works as a collections assistant at Governor's House Library, an affiliated branch of the University of Florida, George A. Smathers Libraries, in St. Augustine. So she's in my department, as a matter of fact. Her passion for Florida's cultural heritage has taken her public history career in museums and libraries up and down the state's coast for the past decade. She holds an MA in Museum Studies as well as a BFA in Photography and a BA in Anthropology from the University of Florida. Okay. And their presentation is called It Takes a Village, Bringing Zora Neale Hurston Home to St. Augustine.
All right.
And related issue, but not directly related, we have an exhibit from the Women's Exchange of St. Augustine that chronicles the friendship of Marjorie Rawlings and Zora Neale Hurston. So this is a big day for Anna Lilios. In the back of the room, right. So please take some time with that exhibit afterwards and during the breaks. Thank you. You'll say.
And I'm just going to do a little sound check here. Can everybody hear this? Yes. Thank you. Yep, go right ahead.
Thank y'all. We'll try to make this fast because I know we're all hungry. Yeah? I think that's something we can all agree on, right? All right, well, thanks. We are going to present a little bit about, I don't know how many of y'all were here last year, well, not here, but in St. Augustine with us and got to see Color Struck at Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. A raise of hands. Okay, then I won't have to explain as much, but I will still explain for those who didn't join us. Y'all missed out.
Yes. Awesome.
It was sold out. It was sold out.
Yes, it was sold out. So I'm going to do a little background on it. The idea of hosting Color Struck at Lincolnville Museum, it came from a 2020 project that we started working on, but I work with Governor's House Library and I work with a bunch of archives and museums. We have luckily a very tight network of cultural heritage professionals in St. Augustine. And we started collaborating on how can we better emphasize Black history in our community. We do an excellent job talking about colonial history and putting our Spanish heritage on the map in a world that is very obsessed with pilgrims. So we do a great job at that, but we don't talk about our 500 plus years of Black history as well. So it grew out of that. It was called Brazilians, Black Heritage in St. Augustine. So with that project going on and everyone's doing their own thing, me and several colleagues started talking to Flo about, hey, what can we do? And Flo's of course like, well, Zora lived in St. Augustine, and then that kind of grew into, well, Deborah Dickey is interested in staging this play that Zora wrote that's also set in St. Augustine. And then we all, and I should mention that those colleagues included David and Darian, right. So please correct me if I'm ever wrong during this. I give you full privilege. So we started talking and it just made sense, and we realized this play has never been staged in Florida. It's been staged elsewhere. It was never staged during Zora's lifetime. So it just made sense. And those who aren't familiar, Lincolnville is our historically Black neighborhood in St. Augustine. And they have a wonderful museum there that covers 500 plus years of history. And it just made the most sense to bring it back to a Black neighborhood that Zora would have been familiar with while she lived there. So I'll go a little into that. A little bit about, oh, thank you. A little background to Colorstruck. I mentioned earlier, the play is set partially in St. Augustine and partially in Jacksonville and on a train in between. It is set in 1900. It's been brought up many times already, but she wrote it in about 1925 while living in Harlem. It won second place for a drama award. And then it went on to be published in Fire with Langston Hughes in 1926. The play delves into topics of colorism and what are the other things?
Well, all of those things that go across communities, like jealousy, color. Okay, well, I will go ahead and talk a little bit about that. What I wanted to talk about first, though, is a little bit of the background of Zora as a playwright. Because a lot of people are not aware of her writings, first of all, as a playwright. And I wanted to mention that her first formal education was in theater. And by that I mean it was education of life. She was engaged as a maid and as a dresser for a Gilbert and Sullivan touring company, and for the leading lady there.
Okay, well, we're going to skip around because I feel like that's very accurate for Zora's life for anyone who's written about her and understands. She was all over the place, so it feels accurate to kind of go back and forth because it is really interesting. We talked a little bit, and this is something we keep going back, and we're like, there's so many literary and theater ties to Zora, but she also has ties to Northeast Florida that predate Colorstruck and also come after Colorstruck. So before that, like we mentioned, she spent time in Jacksonville attending, Florida Baptist Academy. I gotta keep all of those straight. And then she lived with her brother there, and there's some lost years, but Jacksonville was really formative to her time growing up, so she would have been familiar with like St. Augustine. She would have been familiar with the idea of going down there to parties, which just happens in the play. So, and then after Colorstruck, she actually did end up back in St. Augustine, where she was doing research on Fort Mose, and also ended up getting married, but that's not theater related. But she also returned to Jacksonville for the Federal Writers Project, and then she also taught at a Florida Normal College in West Augustine. And then she'd go on and to a life in theater. Here.
You think we rehearsed enough? Okay. Yeah, I wanted to mention that with the Gilbert and Sullivan Company, she was with them for about 18 months. Wow. And therefore, she saw a lot of theater in a practical sense. She was backstage. She was watching how theater was put together, how plays were written, really. And when Flo Turcotte, I'm going to blame you, Flo, handed me this, sent this script to me, and she said, "What do you think of it?" Because I knew there must be questions about this play, Color Struck. And I looked at it and I went, well, you know, it's got a lot of dramatic, theatrical elements that she must have been aware of. And it was from this time with this theater company that she made those observations. The other thing she did was making friends. And people who any of you have ever worked in theater, and maybe for a short time or a long time, you become a family when you do a play. And she found that out driving from city to city, traveling from city to city on a train, and getting an education from those actors. And there was one particular actor who was giving her a more classical education because he was sending along to her, he was letting her borrow some of his books. And as we all know, she loved to read books. And so she learned a lot about the classics that way and listening to classical music. So her education started at that juncture, I would say. But getting back to the Gilbert and Sullivan Company, in her book, Dust Tracks on a Road, she says, "My feet mounted up the golden stairs as I entered the stage door of that theater. The sounds, the smells, the backstage jumble of things were all things to bear me up into a sweeter atmosphere. Everything was pleasing and exciting. If there was any more to heaven than this, I didn't want to see it." So she starts out from that point.
That's a great
And excuse me, because I need this. She started out from that point in her interest in theater. And I think it's very interesting to note that her first 3 awards for writing were for plays. Now, these plays did not get produced. I mean, some of them did, but this one in particular, Color Struck, she had so many disappointments with it, where someone said, well, you know, yeah, we're going to put this on, and we've got a theater, blah, 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 and all that. It never happened in her lifetime, as Casey mentioned. And that really was our guiding light on this show, because we were just determined for this play to be done, even though she'd not seen it during her own lifetime. And we really felt like we had the spirit of Zora with us along the way. I wanted to mention then, when she went into New York for a time, and as we also mentioned, worked with the Federal Theater Project later, and she would have been working with people like John Hausman of the Negro Unit of the Federal Theater Project, and the Lafayette Theater, Harlem, and also a man who wrote or did an adaptation of Shakespeare called The Voodoo Macbeth, Orson Welles. So it's very possible that she worked with him or at least knew him at the time. She arrived in New York and was seeing everything she could afford to see. And one of the things that she did was see Mae West. And if anyone's familiar with her shocking play called Sex, it was banned. She was thrown in jail for obscenity for 3 days. This is Mae West. And you know, I kept thinking, that's Zora's kind of woman. And knowing Mae West's personality, she was a theater producer primarily. And I'm sure that appealed to Zora, that here's somebody, if she can do it, I can do it, that sort of thing. And so she wrote this about Mae West. I noted that Mae West in Sex had much more flavor of the turpentine quarters than she did of the white bawd. I know that the piece she played on the piano is a very old juke composition. Honey, Let Your Drawers Hang Down had been played and sung in every juke joint in the South for at least 35 years. But it has also always puzzled me why she thought it likely to be played in a Canadian bawdy house, where that particular play was set. In her later years, and this is the Mae West card that, you often have these little cards that you would advertise your shows. And so she sent this one out to Carl Van Vechten and said, "You must come and see Mae West. She does the most perfect Harlem bit of any person on the white stage." So that was high compliment from her. And then in later years, she moved on, and I think we have to realize for the next 20 years of her life, she was writing a lot of plays. And I really feel that if any of these had been staged, if she'd really gotten her momentum going, that she probably would have headed in that direction more. And now that we know that her novels, of her literary output otherwise, became really what was most effective and most popular. But again, this was her beginning. And so it was very exciting for us to discover this play, Color Struck, which I had not heard of, and was really delighted to see. We did want to mention that her admiration, because I think it's been mentioned to some degree here earlier, that the affinity between Zora and Marjorie had a lot to do with the culture that they were showing us in their writings. And I think that the cracker culture and as well as the African American culture at that time was very similar in their aims as far as Marjorie and Zora were concerned. Zora wanted to give authenticity to the voices that she heard in her native Florida, which she said was on her tongue. And during the Harlem Renaissance, she was discouraged because many of the big lights of the Renaissance were more interested in emulating white writing and elevating it. And of course, Zora was interested in bringing the real voice and sound of her people that she grew up with here in Florida. So I think they had a great affinity for that. And many of you may have heard this quotation that she wrote to Marjorie when she first started corresponding with her. 21 guns. I have just read Cross Creek carefully and prayerfully. It is a most remarkable piece of work. You turn your inside light on their community life, and it broke like day. And I think that also addresses Zora. Her play, Color Struck, I think when it was being considered, because the committee was looking at it before I became involved, they were concerned about doing it. They're concerned about the dialect. But Zora really was about giving truth to the way people spoke, just as Marjorie was with the cracker culture. And something that would have been lost had these women not written it as it was. And what she was encountering in New York, and one of the reasons she wasn't succeeding so much with her plays, was that Shuffle Along was one of the first all-black musicals in New York, and it was very popular, but by the time she started writing her plays, it was on the wane. And we were also falling into caricature, because we had white writers characterizing black stories. And even though there was a very strong element of interest in black culture, and we all know how these celebrities who would go up to Harlem to all of the clubs there and want to be a part of it and bring it to the New York stage, which many of them did succeed in doing. I did want to just move on, because I know we're not going to have a lot of time here, to the production itself that we did in St. Augustine. So the opportunity for me to produce and direct this play, it all seemed to come together. It seemed impossible. Everyone was so afraid of who was going to, I mean, the committee, people from all around the community saying, well, we need to ask them how they feel about it. And there was just this enormous, unanimous response saying, yeah, let's do it. And I can't tell you how important it was to the Lincolnville community. it just was phenomenal. I felt like that everything kind of fell into place, and again, the Zora maybe was helping us out, because working with Gail Phillips and the Lincolnville Museum, they were the reason that we were able to do it there. And everyone in the committee was saying, well, we really should do it at Lincolnville. Well, Lincolnville was getting a new renovation. They were going to have a beautiful new theater, but it wasn't going to happen right away. And when I was talking to Gail, she says, well, we're not putting anything on the schedule this year because we're expecting to start the renovation. Well, that got delayed, and we were the only people on the bill for the year. So that was the first thing, to get this wonderful space. And I was very familiar with Lincolnville because when I worked with a classic theater, it was their home for several years. And there's just a wonderful feel to that. And I feel like I'm sort of in there now because of these posts. And if you've ever been to Lincolnville, you know, you have to kind of sit over here and sit over there and stage it. Do we do it over here? Do we do it back here? That sort of thing. The things, I just want to first give you 4 scenes that we were talking about. The train from Jacksonville to St. Augustine was coming in for the cakewalk competition. Now I can talk to you a little bit about the history of the cakewalk. Any of you ever done a cakewalk in school? Yes. See? Was it sort of like a musical chairs
yes,
thing?
Yes, same thing, only with cakes.
So that's where it fell finally. But it really started out a lot, sometimes in Flagler's hotels in St. Augustine, the waiters would perform cakewalks, and they would compete for these beautiful cakes. Again, I have a memory of my grandmother. I asked her years ago, what's a cakewalk? She stood up in her 90s and showed me the strut of the cakewalk. I'm going, really? So the first element is really a wonderful community of people coming in for this, in their Sunday best, to do these performances, and it was for themselves. It wasn't for white audiences, which was happening at some of the, the hotels. It was for themselves, and the joy was just amazing in the way she depicted this, kidding each other. And in the first scene, they're talking about, oh, you people from Palatka, and you St. Augustiners and Jacksonville. So same thing we do now with, football, right, between schools. But the second one is, and I have to emphasize that this is in a juke joint, which is what they used to call a body house, really. And so the space was rather small, and Zora describes it as 2 spaces in one room with a curtain. So on one side, the competitors would be waiting, and by the way, they were bringing their picnic baskets, so they would eat before the performance, and on the other side of the curtain was where the performance took place. And that becomes, the central theme in the play as far as what surrounds what's going on in the theater, is the dance competition. And that becomes important because the characters in the play, Emmeline and John, were the protagonists. They are described as the best cakewalkers in Florida. And so the big anticipation is that they are going to be performing their cakewalk. And of course, people from Jacksonville said, well, we're going to take the cake because we got John and we got Emmeline. The problem comes in because Emmeline, she is dark-skinned, and she accuses John of only being interested in light-skinned women. And so this becomes a bone of contention. It gets to the point where she says, I'm not going to go out there. I don't want to dance with all those light-skinned girls. And the one particular was Effie, who's a very sweet girl that we meet on the train coming in. And she refuses to dance. So she's backstage while the performance is going on in the other room. And they're calling for the couple from Jacksonville, John and Emmeline. Well, of course, John eventually shows up, and then he gets something in his ear and says, the dancer with John will be Effie, and she is from another city. So they do win the competition, and that is really what's so poignant is that Emmeline, she's missed a great moment in her life. And I think we all know this. This is why I really appreciate the universality of her characters. And that is, we've all had disappointments in life. We've not had the courage to do something that we knew we were good at and to lose out. And unfortunately, this travels with Emmeline all through her life. So by the fourth scene of the play, she has been living in very poor conditions in Jacksonville, and John comes back to visit her after 20 years, after the death of his wife. He lives up north, Philadelphia, and he comes to say, I've come to get you, I want to marry you. And she accuses him of, oh, you probably married one of those light-skinned girls. And he says, no, I found someone as close to like you as I could. So again, the thing is, John's really a pretty cool character in this play because he has been loyal to her, he keeps reassuring her, but again, the issue of colorism within her own community. Not to mention, the larger world outside, but this is all set in their own community. So this is an issue that has lasted, and it's still happening in the Black community as well as the white community, but to not a lesser degree. And so this is a very important theme of her play. When you think about it, she is showing the joy of these characters, the camaraderie, the community, and yet a very important theme in the play. We put up two examples of the cakewalk definition, yes. Now, this is Amalu Amira Baraka, who is a 60s African-American playwright. And he wrote a play called Slave Ship, which I thought was so fabulous because it opens in darkness.
Yes.
And you hear, it is the slave ship, you hear the sounds, you hear the chains, you hear all the moaning, everything that's going on that ship. You're not seeing the actors yet, you're just seeing a panorama of their experience. So it's like a history pageant, that play. So in the 1960s, he was writing, if it is a Negro, see if you can follow this. It's a clever quote. If it is a Negro dance, caricaturing white customs, which it was, because it goes back to plantation days, where they would get up and dance and make fun of these cotillions that the white folks were having. And then it kind of evolved and moved on. And again, the cakewalk really became verboten to some degree because it was considered to be a part of slave culture. Although it evolved, it actually became one of the first African-American plays. Of course, we can go on to tap and jazz and everything else. But one of the first, really, to cross the color line, to be seen in white theaters. And so Baraka's quotation is very interesting. He says, if it is a Negro dance caricaturing white customs, what is that dance when a white theater company tries to satirize it as a Negro dance? I find the idea of white minstrels in blackface satirizing a dance, satirizing themselves, a remarkable kind of irony. Okay? So you can see how it had fallen into disrespect with a lot of people. But again, we've been talking about history here, and it's so important that we know our history. That we don't just, it's sort of like people who know 3 things from the Bible, and you go, no, you got a little closer. Where did that come from, And we really have to study our history. And this is such an important moment. And these are from the St. Augustine, the St. Augustine Museum, Historical Society photos. Thank you. I don't talk much. And showing one of the cakes. And I'll tell you, for our production, we had 2 of the most beautiful cakes donated for the cakewalk.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Well, I do. I have one with chocolate all over my hands because I was a wonderful baker from Jacksonville She said, sure, I'll do that. And she brought us this huge cake, and I was so afraid it was going to topple before I got it on the table. But anyway, that's just to speak to the fact that so many people work in on it. We want to do this, and that's what really happened. First person I reached out to was Joy Manning. Joy, I worked with her on my Panama play several years ago. And I said, Joy, we're doing this play by Zora Neale Hurston. Do you want to come? And, oh yeah. She didn't know anything about it. And she just wanted to come and see what it was all about. She went from being my assistant director, dialect coach, to my producer. I said, Joy, we're going to put you in as producer, because she was the one who got the actors. She prayed before every rehearsal. She got everybody together. She provided food for everyone. I said, well, I maybe will give some crackers to actors when they come. And that's what I'm doing wrong at rehearsals. You need to feed the actors. But they just became their own, and there were people who knew each other to begin with, a lot of them. But we had teachers. We had people who'd never been on the stage before. And my favorite was Joy's uncle, who lived in Orlando. She says, my uncle used to be on radio. He'd be great for the announcer in the cakewalk. I said, Joy, he's in Orlando. Rehearsals are in St. Augustine. And she said she sent him the script. He read it, called her back in half an hour and said, I'm in. And he came every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for rehearsals from Orlando. So they're just kind of emblematic of what we're talking about with this particular play. The other quotation, no, that's fine. I don't think we have that one on here. But this is really what we wrote in the program. This is James Weldon Johnson, who some of you know from Jacksonville, in his autobiography of an ex-colored man. 1912, he wrote this. He described his first encounter with the cakewalk contest in Jacksonville. There are a great many colored people who are ashamed of the cakewalk, but I think they ought to be proud of it. It gives evidence of a power that will someday be applied to the higher forms. In this measure, at least, the race has been a world influencer. And all you have to do is look around right now and know how we come forward from the cakewalk. And that was very important, because yes, then we get into the 1920s and 30s. And one of my favorite plays I ever saw was musical version of Pearlie. Pearlie Victorious was this straight play. Pearlie, my Pearlie. Oh, I can sing the whole soundtrack, So just the joy that's involved. So we have a couple of pictures from the show. And one of the things I want to stress is the language. And I don't want to get too far into it. But the fact that Zora was very careful about recording language as it was spoken. So you notice that, in the first one, the first scene, this is Effie on the right and Emmeline on the left. And you sort of see John there on the left side. And a wonderful couple in the background, enjoying them. So the young boy gets off, Wesley gets up and he says, look here, you cakewalkers, y'all ought to get up and limber up your joints. And he goes on to talk about what St. Augustine people were doing against, Reddy and people from Black and all that sort of thing. And then in the next scene, we have Effie with the hat on, and this is young Wesley behind her. And before the show begins, they all start to eat. And she says, y'all have a piece of my blueberry pie, it's mighty nice. Well, the whole time she's saying that to John, Emmeline is glaring at her. How dare you speak to my boyfriend? So again, another theme that is kind of erroneous. And what Zora does is she makes Effie such a sweet, lovable character. How could it really emphasizes the contrast between her and what Emmeline has in her own mind. It has really become a stumbling block for her. And when Emmeline is in backstage waiting to go on and decides not to go, she has this whole rant about how the whole world is against her. And her line is, the whole world has got a sign in it. Wanted, light colored, us blacks were made for cobblestones. And that is such a wonderful image that she has. And that's the other thing about her writing, using metaphors and similes, and how, you know, in African American speech, there is such color and description in words. And this is been the final, well, I don't think we have the picture of that, but in the final scene of the play, which skips now, this is the other thing that's hard. You go from, you know, 1900 to 1920 in the fourth scene, when they're reunited. And he has come back to claim her, and he's telling her how happy she's going to be. He's going to take her up to Philadelphia. He's going to teach her to drive, blah, 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 and all that sort of thing. And I don't know if you can see, no, you can't see. In the background, she has a daughter, and this becomes a very important moment in the play as well. He's willing to adopt the child, that sort of thing. And her jealousy rages up. She goes off to get to get a doctor to help the young girl, and unfortunately, there's a sad ending to that. I do want to mention, though, the other important people in this project, and again, how quickly they signed on. And my choreographer, Antonio Scott. And Antonio, this is him on the right front. This is during our talk back at the end of the show. And he didn't know me. He was recommended by someone who had the position he was in at the public schools in St. Augustine School District. He came and met with me. He was so into it. He was so ready to do it. And I thought, you know, I got to find the right choreographer to do a cakewalk. He has had an incredible career as a dancer and choreographer. He worked with the Alvin Ailey Company in New York and all over the place. He's a wonderful choreographer. And that was why a lot of people came to rehearsal. Oh, they wanted to be there for the dance. And there was one young woman who, you know, she wasn't going to be in that scene. And she said, well, can I just come and do the rehearsal? I said, absolutely. And he was so encouraging and so wonderful. And the last thing that I want to share with you, is that it behind you? Thank you. I just want to give you, because one of the things I did structurally to make the play work was that I added 4 introductions to each scene in the voice of Zora Neale Hurston. And these were all taken from her writing and kind of framed each of the scenes that we did. This is the final scene of the play. Emmeline's life has been devastated. And then we hear the voice of Zora at the end.
Last night, I had a curious experience. In all the years that my mother has been dead, I've only dreamed of her 3 times, and this was the 3rd. She appeared younger than I'd known her. She was 29 when I was born, and in the dream, if I call it that, she was a girl in her late teens. A serene, happy aura was about her. She said nothing, just smiled and beamed on me, handed me a note written on lined paper of a cheap tablet, and somehow was gone. I unfolded the note, written in lead pencil, and read, "The hidden enmity will come out into the open now, but do not be afraid. See yourself go to greater heights, and let not your heart be troubled, honey. I am following the instructions of the dream, and I want to be a green thing, the color of life, and grow until it shadows the sun at noon."
Okay, so it was lovely to have that. an inner voice, an authentic voice. Actress named Twyla Hudson, who is a native of St. Augustine person, and just a wonderful experience.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you guys understand why we brought Deborah in and why I let Deborah do most of the talking, because she really brought the whole thing to life. She did the bulk of the work, so we can't thank her enough. But something that came up in planning along the way, and I just wanted to mention it here briefly, is it was really important to us in the discussions, and you understand with the themes and the topics and understanding history, is we wanted to make sure we had at least one community reflection after the play where we could discuss the topics of the play, the importance, what it means within this community, this space. And we were lucky to have such a wonderful panel and all the actors and Deborah and everyone talk about it with the audience. And I was really surprised, I was in the audience during it, at how many were unaware of Zora's theater work. Or there were several people who had no clue who Zora was, and they were like, well, I hope people get to know who she is. And I'm like, I was amazed as someone who's grown up knowing Zora. I read it literally in a high school down the street. I read her works. So it really amazed me. So there's definitely more work to be done in like sharing and spreading her work. And I also wanted to thank was the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Society helped sponsor it, as well as the UF George A. Smathers Libraries, making it possible. So, you know, need to pay all your actors, even though it's a passion.
Absolutely.
That's true.
And I just will tell you that this is a picture of the cast here, and I also have some programs from the show here if someone wants to check those out.
And if you'd like to learn any more, we listed our sources, though. I feel like Deborah probably said 10 other sources that could have been listed there. And then also, I helped create a digital exhibit on Zora's time in St. Augustine, if you want to dive more into that. That's available through UF George A. Smathers Libraries. Thank you. Now enjoy lunch.